Look at almost any mammal. Lions have fur. Zebras have fur. Chimpanzees have fur. Even a tiny mouse is wrapped in a coat. And then there's us, a mostly hairless ape, walking around with exposed skin as if evolution looked at the standard mammal design and decided, yeah, let's remove the insulation. Which is actually pretty strange, because fur is useful. It keeps you warm. It protects your skin. It helps shield you from the environment. So why would evolution get rid of something that works so well? The short answer is that we don't know for certain. The longer answer involves heat, parasites, sex, sweat, fire, clothing, and a surprisingly complicated argument about what our ancestors were actually doing millions of years ago. Let's start with the obvious suspect: heat. At some point in our evolutionary history, our ancestors started spending more time moving through hot, open environments. And that changed the rules. If you're walking or running for hours under a hot African sun, your body is producing a huge amount of heat. And if you're covered in thick fur at the same time, getting rid of that heat becomes much harder. That's where humans became a little unusual. We sweat. A lot. The human body has roughly 2 to 4 million eccrine sweat glands, spread across much of the skin. We're basically elite sweating machines. And sweating is an incredibly effective cooling system. Sweat reaches the surface of your skin, evaporates, and takes heat with it. Simple. But there's a catch. For that system to work really well, the sweat needs to reach exposed skin. A thick coat of fur gets in the way. So one leading idea is that our ancestors gradually became less hairy because being able to dump heat efficiently became more valuable than keeping a permanent fur coat. Imagine trying to chase an animal across the African savanna while wearing a heavy winter jacket. You don't need a PhD in evolutionary biology to realize that's probably not going to end well. And this may have given humans an unusual advantage. We could stay active for long periods without overheating as quickly. But heat isn't the only explanation, because there's another problem with having a lot of hair: parasites, ticks, lice, fleas, biting insects. A thick coat of hair is basically real estate for anything that wants to live on your body. And some of those creatures aren't just annoying, they can carry disease. So another hypothesis is that having less body hair may have made our ancestors less attractive to parasites. Less hair means fewer places to hide. It could also make parasites easier to see and remove. Now, does that mean parasites caused humans to lose their hair? Not necessarily. The evidence isn't strong enough to say that. But it could have added another evolutionary advantage to becoming less hairy. And then there's a third possibility, one that goes all the way back to Charles Darwin: sexual selection. The idea is that perhaps our ancestors didn't just become less hairy because it helped them survive. Maybe they also became less hairy because other humans liked it. That sounds strange today, but sexual preferences can influence evolution. If individuals repeatedly prefer certain traits in their partners, those traits can become more common over many generations. Maybe reduced body hair signaled something: health, youth, cleanliness, fewer parasites. We don't know. And that's the problem. We can't go back 2 million years and ask our ancestors what they found attractive. So there probably wasn't one single reason humans became so unusually hairless. Heat may have mattered. Parasites may have mattered. Sexual selection may have mattered. And several of these pressures may have worked together. But losing our fur created a pretty serious problem. Fur isn't just decoration, it's insulation. So if you remove your natural winter coat, you've just made yourself much better at getting rid of heat. And much worse at keeping it. And this is where humans did something extremely human. We solved a biological problem with technology. Fire gave us warmth. Shelters gave us protection. Animal hides gave us insulation. And eventually clothing allowed us to put our missing fur back on whenever we needed it. Hot? Take it off. Cold? Put it on. We basically outsourced our fur. But here's the important part. Fire and clothing probably weren't the original reason humans lost their body hair. Substantial hair reduction appears to have happened before sophisticated clothing became widespread. So technology probably didn't make us hairless. It simply made hairlessness easier to live with. And then the story gets even stranger, because humans aren't the only mammals that have lost most of their hair. In 2022, researchers compared the genomes of 62 different mammal species, including humans, dolphins, elephants, rhinos, whales, walruses, pigs, armadillos, manatees, and naked mole rats. These animals aren't close relatives in any simple sense. They live in completely different environments. They have completely different lifestyles. And yet they share something bizarre. They're all unusually hairless. The researchers wanted to know whether these animals had independently evolved hairlessness, or whether there was some common genetic trick behind it. They examined more than 19,000 protein coding genes and hundreds of thousands of regulatory regions in the genome, and what they found was fascinating. Hairlessness had evolved independently at least 9 different times across the mammal family tree. Think about what that means. A whale didn't become hairless because its ancestor was a hairless whale. A rhinoceros didn't inherit naked skin from some ancient naked rhinoceros. A naked mole rat didn't get its lack of fur from the same ancestor that gave humans ours. These animals arrived at similar solutions independently. Different branches, different environments, different problems. And yet some surprisingly similar genetic changes appeared again and again. Genes involved in hair structure changed. Regulatory regions controlling hair growth changed. And that reveals something important about evolution. Nature doesn't always need to invent a completely new solution. Sometimes it simply stops maintaining an old one. If an animal no longer depends heavily on a particular feature, mutations that would once have been harmful may no longer be strongly selected against. The machinery gradually becomes less important, and eventually the animal can look completely different. That may be a part of what happened to us. We didn't suddenly wake up one morning and discover that someone had stolen our fur. It happened gradually, generation after generation. A little less hair, a little better sweating, a little more dependence on behavior, and eventually, a completely different way of dealing with the environment. But there's something else that makes the human story unusual. Once we became less dependent on our own bodies for protection, we became increasingly dependent on things outside them. Fire, shelter, clothing, tools, and eventually knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Other animals have built-in solutions. Polar bears have fur, seals have thick layers of insulation, elephants have enormous ears for dumping heat. Humans, we have blankets and jackets and central heating, which is a very human solution to an evolutionary problem. But our growing dependence on technology did something even more important. It gave us flexibility. Too cold? Build a fire. Too hot? Find shade. Too exposed? Build shelter. Need insulation? Put on a jacket. Instead of waiting millions of years for our bodies to adapt to every new environment, we could change the environment around us. And eventually, humans took that ability incredibly far. We now live in deserts, frozen landscapes, mountains, and cities surrounded by concrete. Our bodies didn't evolve perfectly for all of those places. Our technology did the rest. And that's the really strange thing about human evolution. We didn't simply evolve to fit the world. We increasingly learned how to change the world to fit us. So, why did humans end up naked? The honest answer is that nobody knows exactly. Heat regulation is probably one of the strongest explanations. Parasites may have contributed. Sexual selection may have played a role. And environmental changes almost certainly mattered. But it probably wasn't one switch that turned off our fur. It was millions of years of small evolutionary pressures pushing in different directions. And here's the part I find most interesting. Our ancestors became unusually good at staying cool. They became unusually bad at staying warm. So instead of growing another fur coat, they invented one. Fire, clothing, shelter, technology, culture. Evolution took away the fur. Humans figured out the rest. And maybe that's the real story of why humans ended up naked.